You know, growing up, uh, I was lucky. I had a grandfather that was a pastor, missionary for over 40 years. And then after that, he was like retired and did a lot of church work. So over my lifetime while he was alive and in his right mind, I was lucky. I had a good grandfather. And he was very methodical, very strict, and but he was well taught, right? He was educated. He knew biblical Greek, biblical Hebrew, English, Spanish, Russian, German. So he was a very well educated man. But anyway, so I had that as a young child. I had that education passed down, and so without him knowing it, he would just teach, and you think, oh, okay. And I didn't really know what that he was teaching, and he didn't really know he was teaching either. It was just that it was just a natural flow of things. So I had a great role model, and somebody who had a lot of experience with a lot of different things, church, dealing with church splits, people, just all kinds of stuff. So I was lucky, my in my very primitive early years, I had got to hear a lot, and I had a pretty wide knowledge of different things and things that had happened that he had gone through, and just the things that he did and how to approach it. So I'm grateful for that. And one of the things that number one thing that my grandfather, and not only him but in that whole generation and the people that come out of that, was the moral integrity. And I'll give you an example. My grandfather said that so he would have his office, and then um, just say my grandmother was the one that played the piano, kind of, so did a lot of the help of my grandfather, right? So whether it was my grandmother at the desk or a secretary, depending on which church they were at, he would have his office, and there would be a secretary or my grandmother. And number one thing was moral integrity. So my grandfather and a lot of the men in that generation, their rules were very simple. Number one, as a man, if a woman came in without her husband or a male, um, if she, it was not off the table for her to come in and talk to the pastor. That wasn't it. What it was okay. My grandfather would be at his desk, and if a woman without a husband or whatever, my grandmother, my grandmother was either there, or if there was a secretary at the time at her desk, the door to his office was always open. Now, that doesn't mean that whoever was in the secretary desk or my grandmother may have been in the room too, that they could hear the conversation, but the door was open, so anybody could walk in and they could walk out. Very, very important. And he always said, never ever close the door and be in a room with a female by yourself. Because if you do that, if something goes wrong, you're going to pay for it. And not that anything would have gone wrong with my grandfather, but he just had that very strict. This is the way I work. This is how my business is. So that moral integrity, faithful in marriage, you know, um, as a pastor and a missionary, his emotional. What do I call it? Just say emotional. Um, would be very nonviolent, not an argumentative kind of person. I'm talking in the pastoral. Grandpa and I, we argued theology and all that. That's different. I'm talking as a professional pastor in the role of the church. Not an argumentative guy, very gentle. Um, they I can remember stories like their hospitality was wonderful. So they always had people over for dinner, coffee, games. So they were very and not a very gentle kind of guy. A wiry, gentle kind of guy, right? Not a big guy, just a wiry, gentle kind of guy. But he could fight if he had to. So, but that was not his nature. Um, he just had the ability to do that. Um, as far as money and greed, my grandparents died in poverty with nothing. They died with nothing. It was my dad that paid for the funerals. So they were definitely not greedy. They were not out there to gain in a very unethical way, financially or monetarily. Nothing like that. Very very money was not their god. Their god was mission field, and their god was number one to save soul, get people into the kingdom of God. That's all that mattered. So getting ahead or getting up, climbing the ladder within the church or outside the church, that was never their objective. Like, to be very honest, my grandfather was not a very dynamic preacher or speaker, but I think what attracted people to them was that they just had that down to earth, and it was their intercommunication skill with people outside of the pulpit. I think that's what people loved about them, and of course they come from the Great Depression era, so you have to understand the era they come from, and what they went through. So, but again, well educated. They actually had education degrees, Bible college degrees, so they were well educated. So anyway, when it came to spiritually, their spiritual, what do you call it, condition, um, very very the opposite of what most people would think. There was no jealousy, envy, or pride in them. Like if they saw somebody else more successful, they had no pride or envy and jealousy of that person. They just were, again, like I said, all they cared about was getting souls into the kingdom of God. That's it. So they had that characteristics, and of course, they had an agenda, and their agenda was to get people into the kingdom, and so that was a big thing. Um, when it came to, I would say, again, he was not a dynamic preacher, so he would not, you're not going to see him. You would not see him at the front of the or with all the big crowds. He wasn't that guy. But I will say one thing: when it came to oversight, he was very good. Um, again, countless going to the sick, visiting people in the hospital, visiting people that couldn't get to church. He would go and have communion with them. I think in one of my boxes, I actually have his actual communion kit. Yeah, very special. And I have a lot of his books, pastoral books, kind of like how to conduct a funeral, how to conduct a wedding, stuff like that, that I kind of treasure, you know. And obviously, a lot of commentaries and a lot of not all, a lot of that stuff he gave away, but the very last of the books before he died, I got those. And to be honest, I haven't read much of them. A few of them, like I had the same book. Some of the books I had the same because I went to Bible college, so there was a crossover, um, and all the rest. When it came to kind of visionary governing the church, like they were proactive, like they wanted to start a Christian school in one of their churches to get Christian education and to put children instead of the public school, put them in a biblical education environment. So they were kind of proactive, even in at that time. They were kind of on the cutting edge of some of those things. But again, small churches down in Washington State, in Canada. So they've been around the world, right, so to speak. Missionaries down in Cuba, they got kicked out. Well, they had to leave there because of Castro. Um, so I got, and well, they lived in Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago. But good people, right? Good people. Equipping people to go out and reach other people. That was a big one for them, you know. But I want to get to the one that's kind of the one that's the most important. I'll do another video on that one.